You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. I was pulling cards for inspiration for this podcast episode, and I ended up pulling the Knight of Wands and the Seven of Pentacles. And I didn't pull with any specific question or spread in mind. I was just feeling kind of creatively blocked. I wasn't sure what I wanted to talk about. And so I was like, well, let me pull some cards and see what happens. And what a fun moment of reflection these two cards offered me. And really, because of the tension that the two of them hold when you look at them together, because at face value, they really couldn't appear more different. But then, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at them and I started to really peel back these layers, peel back the facade. And there is an interesting thread of connection. And I think it's a shared experience, a common value, and passion. And what's interesting is, I was thinking about this word passion, how I really think that is what connects these two cards. And I was thinking that, okay, well, yeah, the word passion might seem obvious for the Knight of Wands, but it's probably not the first adjective that comes to mind when you think of the Seven of Pentacles. Like I wouldn't look at the Seven of Pentacles and say, oh, this person's passionate. I would say this person's maybe dedicated and patient. So it was interesting that this word passion and passionate, was kind of swirling around my brain. But then I was like, okay, well, the urgency that's inherent in the Knight of Wands has to be a consequence of that archetype's passion. And then if we look at the Seven of Pentacles, their main descriptor, of course, like I said, being patience. So their patience must then be a direct consequence of their passion. So one is charging towards their desire, towards their passion, and the other one is waiting for it because they care about it. Something else that was interesting to consider looking at these two cards is I actually feel like they mimic relationship dynamics that I typically see, especially in my practice, where one partner is, kind of all fire, high sense of urgency, ready to go, maybe a really big dreamer doer, lots of big ideas. And then the other one is more patient, reserved, steady. And that dynamic is really fascinating to work with. It's actually one of my favorite dynamics to work with because it can be obviously like these folks are attracted to each other, but at the same time, they can be so frustrated and it can feel maddening when you're in that dynamic. But there's something really interesting here because there's an opportunity to learn and self-reflect. Because often when you see this dynamic, the person who's all fire and urgency thinks, oh, so in this case, the Knight of Wands thinks that the Seven of Pentacles partner is, uninterested, holding them back, perhaps boring, doesn't care. But it's usually the opposite. So there's always an opportunity to sit and say, well, let's really look at how you're experiencing this and what assumptions that you're making about, the other partner and get to a place that feels balanced where you're both complementing each other versus constantly feeling like you're in conflict with one another. And when we're in that space, we end up finding out that, the Knight of Wands partner, the partner that's usually very like fiery, comes across as restless because they're wanting things to move quickly. They're either wanting to make a decision very fast, they're wanting to have and process a conversation very quickly, or, want to just be able to be on the go. And the fear here is usually like stagnation. Like, I don't want to be still. They really kind of thrive on like forward motion and leaning into, their kind of like internal energy. And then the other partner, so the Seven of Pentacles partner, is more the calm, reserved, quiet partner. And they tend to just be more willing to hold space, take time, embody this kind of like slower, more intentional rhythm. And they usually believe, hey, it's important to like kind of watch things instead of force them. And so again, you can kind of see how that dynamic can be really difficult when you're in it, because you're really only having your own experience and not understanding where the other person is coming from. When you're working with this dynamic, either kind of personally dealing with your own internal Knight of Wands and Seven of Pentacles, or if this is like a partnership dynamic that you also experience, what I have found when working with couples is this shared passion. And I think maybe that's why the word was popping up into my head when I was thinking about this dynamic, because they're both passionate about whatever is in front of them. They're just showing it in very different ways, and they're experiencing it in very different ways. It doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. They're just different. So for the Knight of Wands, this kind of urgency comes from, or can come from, this intense desire to kind of really experience life. So they might have a lot of FOMO. And then, on the other hand, the Seven of Pentacles is coming from a place of, a desire to cultivate, to nurture, to protect, to give something time to really flourish. So they're both wanting to make the most of a moment. And I think that's this kind of connecting aspect of these two cards and this particular dynamic that gets lost, because one person wants to really cherish and hold on to a moment in a very like different way, usually maybe out of like fear, oh, I can't let this go, I have to do this. And the other is wanting to hold on to and cultivate a moment because, again, of passion. I want to see it grow. I want to make sure that it has like the best experience possible. I don't want to move too quickly through this and not really appreciate it. So you can kind of see how they're both wanting the same thing, but it's being expressed in different ways. Getting to that point where there's this acknowledgement that this dynamic really does want the same thing can be difficult, though, because the worst qualities of these cards can come out, especially in a relationship dynamic. So, like, for example, the Knight of Wands sense of urgency can feel really overwhelming and scary and suffocating for the Seven of Pentacles. Whereas the patience and kind of waiting can feel, from the Seven of Pentacles, can feel like they're withholding, neglecting, disengaging from the Knight of Wands. So a good example of how this might sound in conversation is the Knight of Wands is probably way more likely to say something like, why the hell can't we just do this already? I'm ready to go. Like, we don't need to wait. Like, let's just do it. And the Seven of Pentacles is way more likely to say, wait, why can't we just slow down? Why can't we make sure we're ready? Don't you want this to go well? Again, both totally valid, understand where they're coming from. They're motivated by the same passion, this like sense of care, a drive for something to go well. But it's the tension between the two different experiences that end up leading to conflict. This can be a really great pairing, though, which, again, looking at these two cards, you wouldn't necessarily see it right away without really kind of diving into it, because every relationship, either with ourselves or other folks, does need some sense of urgency, some level of spontaneity, some level of boldness and eagerness and willingness to make a decision, to do something, to move forward with different ideas, while also holding space for patients and, kind of quiet tending to, and a keen observation of what needs to grow and what still needs maybe more watering to continue the garden metaphor of the Seven of Pentacles. And it's really about learning how to balance these two dynamics, these two needs. It's very both and. It's very temperance coded, actually. And now that I'm thinking about this through the lens of temperance, that makes so much sense. There's this alchemy that's happening within temperance as well. And I think there needs to be kind of a really careful balance when mixing these two dynamics, these two energies, because too much urgency and then, the Knight of Wands, the fire of the Knight of Wands just is consumed by itself and can potentially burn out of control before anything can actually even be born from this fire and this desire. But then on the other hand, too much patience, too much waiting, we then risk the spark of the Knight of Wands just completely fizzling out. So there needs to be a perfect kind of combination of both. And we see that effort in temperance, which is really fun to kind of think about now with these two cards. Something else that came up for me while I was, looking at the Knight of Wands and the Seven of Pentacles was actually really exciting because I started thinking about the neurobiology of these two cards and what they represent just based on our kind of our brain and our chemical makeup. And so I started doing some research, which was super fun because I feel like in the beginning of this podcast years ago, I was, really diving into the brain, and I would love to bring up the kind of neurochemical, neurobiological components of tarot. And yeah, I feel like I haven't done that as often in a while. So I went down a little research rabbit hole when thinking about the energy of the Knight of Wands and the Seven of Pentacles. And what I discovered is so cool. So we can look at the Knight of Wands as dopamine. So the Knight of Wands is to dopamine as the Seven of Pentacles is to serotonin. And in fact, so I saw a study that was published by Stanford as recently as last year, actually. I think it was, 2024, which I'll be sure to link in the show notes. And the study was really interesting because it shows dopamine and serotonin functioning in opposition of each other. And I was like, wait, this is exactly what I was thinking. The Knight of Wands and the Seven of Pentacles kind of feeling like, these opposites, but needing each other in order to make everything flow. So when we think about dopamine drives us towards something, novel experiences, rewards. It's like the go chemical, like go, do the thing. That's exciting. And then serotonin encourages this kind of long-term steadiness, restraint. And then I found another study out of Columbia, which I will also link in the show notes, that found that there was this specific region in the brain, I think it was the dorsal nucleus, which was super rich in serotonin, was causally connected to our capacity for patience and impulse control. And then this capacity for restraint is, of course, foundational and super important in resisting short-term impulses for kind of the sake of long-term gains, which is exactly how the Seven of Pentacles functions, which really goes to show how important this kind of interplay between the two of these archetypes really is. So, what's exciting about looking at this from a neurobiological standpoint is, we see, what looks like these two opposing archetypes actually being kind of necessary partners in this neurochemical experience. So while together they embody, that tension between urgency and patience, between the kind of Knight of Wands desire to go this kind of thrill-seeking experience and the Seven of Pentacles, advocating for sustained growth, we now know that without dopamine, aka the Knight of Wands, nothing can truly begin. And without serotonin, aka the Seven of Pentacles, nothing can be sustained. If you're someone with ADHD, this might actually sound kind of familiar because this neurochemical interplay that I'm talking about also kind of mirrors executive functioning. We need dopamine to push us towards, doing something, but then we also need the serotonin to help us commit to that thing and stay focused. Being curious about our own kind of internal Knight of Wands and Seven of Pentacles experience is actually really important when it comes to finding out, what works for us in terms of balancing them. And it's honestly the same in relationships. Earlier I was talking about how couples often mirror this Knight of Wands, Seven of Pentacles polarity, where one partner, is embodying kind of that fieriness of the Knight, that sense of urgency, big ideas, the, excited one. And the other kind of holding this energy of the Seven of Pentacles, being very intentional and grounded and, kind of patient and slower to respond. And again, rather than seeing these as incompatible or conflicting, I think that we should be looking at how they can be framed as complementary, because they really are, and they're necessary in order to feel fully integrated and balanced just as a human, and then for the relationship to feel fully balanced. And so because I love looking at tarot as a question asking tool, often when I pull cards, I don't my first thought isn't an interpretation of the card. My first thought is a question. So when I was thinking about, especially in regards to this being more of a relationship dynamic, something that, these two cards might encourage you to ask your significant other or your friend or even like a coworker, if this dynamic, sounds like it's playing out at work, because very much could be the case. You might want to ask, how does each of us experience and express passion? Because experience and express could also be two different things. A lot of times that Knight of Wands might look at the Seven of Pentacles and think that they are passionless because they're not moving forward. They're not going. They're not, loudly expressing their ideas. And then the Seven of Pentacles might look at the Knight of Wands and think, oh my God, you have no direction. You have, you're not grounded. You're all over the place. So we're making these assumptions that, are probably not accurate, and asking yourself and the other person, how do you experience passion? That's going to give you one answer, but then also, how do you express it? And then even if you're in dialogue with someone else too, you can even say, how do you experience me feeling passion? And how do you experience me expressing passion? That's going to be a really interesting conversation, because often we don't directly solicit that type of feedback from somebody, kind of wondering, how do you experience me feeling passionate? What does that look like for you? So I love asking these types of questions in session with couples, where I will have, one partner ask a question very similar to that. And there's usually a lot of shock, like, oh my God, I didn't even think that I expressed passion that way. And so you learn a lot, not just about the relationship and how your partner experiences you, but you also learn a lot about yourself. So that could be a question that you explore. And then also asking yourself and, in the relationship dynamic, where does this experience, my expression and my experience of passion along with yours, where can it be complementary and supportive? And then where does it often kind of push back or collide or create discomfort? And then having a a gentle, curious dialogue about that experience. And if you want to just explore this experience for yourself, I decided to come up with just a simple 3-card spread based on the topic of dopamine, serotonin, and then what I'm calling integration, which is really also just balance. So I thought it might be interesting to pull a card to represent our dopamine. What is exciting us right now? What's lighting up my reward system? What's giving me a thrill? Where's my desire rooted? Where am I feeling a strong sense of impulse? Where am I being pulled, or what am I being pulled toward? What am I craving? What am I chasing? So that card's going to represent your dopamine. And then card 2 is going to represent your serotonin. So either where am I being called to regulate, or where in my life am I being asked to trust the process? Or you could even flip this and say, how can I regulate? How can I be more patient? How can I trust the process? If you are more of that Knight of Wands energy and you're needing to kind of lean into the function of serotonin. And then card 3 would be that balance or integration. So how can I balance my sense of urgency with my need to also be patient? And of course, if you subscribe to my emails, which are really just me announcing when I release an episode and, other kind of like fun stuff, then you also will have already seen this spread in your email. But if you are not on my email list, I will eventually at some point post it on social media for you to see. So we're going to go ahead and pull now, because why not? We're going to pull for dopamine, serotonin, and integration. Okay, so for card 1 to represent dopamine, I got the Magician, which very interesting, feels right. I mean, the Magician is very much that I can do this, I can make this happen, I have everything that I need, I've got all the tools. Like, yeah, we're gonna do this. And the Magician is very much kind of brain firing everywhere on ideas, projects, opportunities. And I think also feeling kind of limitless. So totally fitting for the dopamine card. I think this is about feeling your capability, like having an initial idea and really believing in yourself to do the thing. And then card 2 to represent serotonin, I actually got the 7 of Cups, which is super fascinating. I love that it's another 7, because what represented serotonin was the 7 of Pentacles. And now choosing a 7 or pulling a 7 for card 2, I don't know. That's interesting. So if I'm remembering correctly, and someone can please correct me if I am not a numerology expert, I feel like 7s are usually, the number 7 is typically associated with like wisdom and like seeking. So I feel like this still kind of fits here for the serotonin card, because oftentimes when we look at the 7 of Cups, we tend to look at it as this card of indulgence. But what if we look at it as considering the options? Because if the Magician is the dopamine card, like, yes, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go for it, then the 7 of Cups is saying, okay, yes, you're going to go for it, but let's figure out which one is going to yield the best results. Let's assess, let's analyze, let's tap into our wisdom, which is going to be, the best idea, the best option, the best, kind of cup to take from and, utilize as, the thing that's going to cultivate this idea from the Magician. So I feel like that checks. And then the integration or balance card, which almost feels a little too cliche, is the Wheel of Fortune. And this just feels Like, so right. We're constantly moving, shifting on this wheel. And I think it's a reminder to the magician that just because you might feel the sense of urgency to move forward with whatever you're capable of right now doesn't mean that if you don't do it right now, you'll never be able to do it. Because just because the wheel's in one position doesn't mean it's never going to come back to that position now. And then for the Seven of Cups, this serotonin card, I also think the Wheel of Fortune speaks to, hey, we have to keep moving. We can't stay still too long. We can't sit and look at all these seven cups and, spend, hours, days, weeks, months, stalling or delaying a decision. Life is still going to move whether you are moving with me or not. So being mindful of that. I almost kind of wish I pulled different cards because both, all of these really just feel a little too obvious. Well, I hope that you all end up pulling for this spread. Please let me know what you end up pulling in the comments if you're listening on Spotify or in the comments on Instagram. And you can always send me an email. I got such a lovely email a couple weeks ago from my grief episode, and it was so touching. And it's always, I don't know, it means so much to me when you all reach out and share little bits about your life and you allow yourself to be vulnerable and let me see you and hold space for you, even if it's just through an email. It means a lot. And I so appreciate all of you who listen and find value in this and how my brain experiences the cards. It really does mean a lot. And I haven't made any sort of official podcast announcements yet, but I do have my first official book coming out in December, which is super exciting. I've previously self-published a workbook and then just a compilation of spreads because folks really wanted some of my spreads all in one place in a book. But this is an actual book, and it's called Dark Shadow, Golden Shadow, and it's being published through Wiser. And it's all about shadow work and using tarot to have this really deep, vulnerable, often scary experience as you navigate your shadow. And I help guide folks in a way that is gentle, but also confronting and compassionate and creative. So you can actually go ahead and pre-order that book now if you feel like it aligns with your tarot practice and what you're interested in. It would super mean a lot to me. So yeah, that's super exciting. I'll eventually talk about it more soon. But yeah, thank you all again for always hanging out with me on this podcast. It really does mean a lot. And as always, you can also subscribe on YouTube. And if you're not a part of my email list already, there's always goodies that come out in there. And plus you get access to episode spreads before anybody else. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.